I was born to rock. Come on, everybody, and turn your head to
Welcome back to The Five. Well, there's a gun debate brewing in Georgia, and now it's in the hands of a federal appeals court. Right now, the state bans guns in religious institutions, but the pro-gun group, GeorgiaCarry.org, says houses of worship should be able to decide themselves, not the state government. So, Kimberly, let me come to you first because you're the lawyer on the panel.
Yes,
the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals today heard these arguments, and you have this pro-gun group saying we should be allowed to carry guns in church.
Right.
Now, there are a whole array of places, mostly public places, where you can't bring a gun. Courthouses, jails, bars without permission of the owner, which is sort of old Wild West,
State mental health facilities.
And in this case, what I find so interesting is the Reverend is the one who wanted to bring the gun in, not to the actual church, but into his church office, because he said he needs to be able to protect himself. There's a lot of money coming in the church every week and so on. What do you make of this case?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting argument. Also, the fact that they're challenging it not just on Second Amendment, which is what you would think, obviously, right, to bear arms, but also on First Amendment grounds, saying that it interferes with their ability to follow their religion and decide for themselves in terms of how they want to conduct their place of worship. So in particular, he's saying that I want to have a place of safety. I want to be able to protect myself. Not saying that he's going to bring it in when he's giving a fiery sermon, but nevertheless have it in the office. I think this is a tough situation. It's probably appropriate to have some reasonable bans with respect to places like, nuclear power facilities or, different schools, that type of thing. But here, because he's not saying into the church itself, but to the offices, it's a bit of a clever argument. Now, the 11th Circuit, has heard healthcare, all of that. They've had a lot on their plate. They heard it today. I'm not quite sure how they're going to come down on this. Usually they'd be supportive of this type of
what's interesting to me is he's challenging the state's right to set its own laws and saying that the state's law should not apply to the church, which seems to me crazy.
Well, I mean, that's the argument from the other side. They're saying that they're well within their rights in the state to be able to make these types
it's the state. I mean, that's why we have politics and arguments and legislatures.
Greg, do you find it interesting that the primary thrust of this case is religious freedom and not, its First Amendment is not Second Amendment, which would seem more logical in this case?
I didn't even notice that. But aside, here's my point. Here's my point. Aside, no, actually, I read the story. Aside from Bob Beckel's apartment, there's nothing more unsafe than a gun-free zone. Telling people that there are no guns in an area is idiotic. So the real question for this story, wherever you're talking about a church or a school, do you feel comfortable being near somebody who is a law-abiding citizen with a gun? And generally, most people in America will say yes. People on the coast say no. I'm comfortable around people with guns. I hang out with people who have guns. And research shows the variable that lowers the casualties of a gun attack is the time it takes to get a second gun there. So you're safer if there's a law-abiding person with a weapon.
And there's been
everywhere.
attacks on churches as well. People have been shot, and they've had shooters come in, and there's been situations where lives have been saved when someone was armed.
May I read it?
Yeah.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Yes,
it doesn't
for a
say
militia.
shall not be infringed in schools, in churches, in convenience stores, in public parks. It just says
for a militia.
For a militia. You have a target-rich environment, which on church on Sunday, sometimes Catholic churches on Saturday, they hold mass, they're bringing in money, and it's cash. And so if a criminal knows that nobody in this church is carrying a weapon or is armed, well, that's just saying
can I make a radical proposal?
Yeah.
Have a security guard. Oh my gosh!
But the security guard can't carry a weapon.
Have a security. I don't understand it.
And
by the way,
I would agree with you if the security guard had a weapon, a real weapon.
Okay, so let the security guard. The security guard has a license. He can bring a weapon in. But to your larger point, let me tell you something. The statistics I've seen indicate that if you have a gun in your home, you are more likely to be the victim of a gun crime. So you say, oh, it takes time to get the second gun to the scene, and you want to therefore introduce the first gun.
No, but to Greg's point, but put it out there that there's a neighborhood that doesn't allow guns in the home.
A neighborhood?
Yeah, just say it.
Oh.
What's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, if you,
hello, home robberies, burglaries.
Well, that's exactly right. And in fact, the last time the Supreme Court ruled on individual gun rights, about 2 years ago, that was the Chicago case, and it was brought by a man who lived in a very dangerous neighborhood,
exactly
and
right.
he said, "I want to be able to defend myself in my own."
You know,
home.
the
Supreme Court agreed.
You know, I had an interesting meeting with. I was walking out of Fox in Washington, and this old black guy comes up to me, and he says, "You're Juan Williams, all this," and he says, "I said, oh well, nice to meet you. I'm walking away." And he said something about he was in the Supreme Court today, and it was the man from that Chicago neighborhood who said he wants a gun to protect himself against these thuggish kids in the neighborhood, and he insists on that right, and how Justice Thomas was the one person who understood the racial history of gun laws in this country.
There you go.
And there you have it.
And you still disagree.
Okay.
Well, no, hey, look,
guys,
I live in a bad neighborhood. You know, come on.
All right, guys, coming up. You know the saying that anything you say can and will be used against you?
Yes.
Well, now the same may be true of one local police department. We're going to tell you about that next.
Like California, you'd see them wearing their baggies, Warachi sandals too, a bushy blonde hair, surfing USA.